Welcome back to this environmental series on CNC3. My guests are Roger Mew, Managing Director of Carib Glass, and Dave Gajadhar, the Logistics Manager of Carib Glass. Let's go to you now, Roger. Obviously, it sounds like recycling glass is a financially viable business.
Yes, if there's legislation behind it. The amount of glass that we do recycle in Trinidad and Tobago is a very small percentage. I think when I mentioned that we make 20 million, we export 25% of that, 10 million are thrown into the waste stream in Trinidad. The actual amount that is collected is a relatively small percentage. It is important, as I mentioned, with respect to the way that it has a closed circuit with the Carib Brewery, where the bottles are then reused and then sent back to us when they're no longer able to be filled with product. It is the same kind of principle that we've been pushing very, very hard with respect to legislation around putting a deposit on bottles. Because you have basically two types of bottles that are recyclable to be used again by the producer, and the other one-way bottles. Those one-way bottles, there's no mechanism for those bottles to come back to Carib Glass. If there was a deposit system on those bottles, then there would be a much higher degree of interest from the public and from businesses to create a business out of the question of getting the public who pay a deposit. Then, of course, when they've paid a deposit and they go to buy new product, they are obviously very interested in getting their deposit back. That means the bottle then is in a closed loop situation, and that would significantly improve the amount of cullet that would be available in Trinidad, and there would be no need essentially for importation of cullet. In fact, we could even be in a position where we could export cullet out of Trinidad and Tobago in the same way that Barbados is exporting cullet, because they have a beverage bill that encourages the recycling of the bottles in Barbados.
Barbados seems so advanced compared to us in so many ways. But I want to ask you, Dave, can you transfer that experience from glass recycling to other recyclable things like, say, plastic, paper? Why hasn't that happened in Trinidad?
Again, it goes back to some sort of legislation governing and the will of, let's say, manufacturers themselves who wants to get raw materials back from recyclables, whereas glass is a high commodity raw material used in the production of glass. Other manufacturing in, let's say, paper or plastics may not find it as viable in terms of having to recycle that, and may more be cheaper from virgin material standpoint. So a combination of a variety of things in terms of legislation and in terms of just the will to execute a recycling program would have caused, let's say, those areas not to be as active in terms of how we can use glass.
But I mean, how much more can our dumps take? They're already overflowing.
Not very much. I mean, if you go to the dump sites these days, I mean, in Beetham it's already crowded. Down in Forest Park, it's extremely crowded in terms of material that can be and this material is just being bulldozed back into the landfills. It's just so much it can take. And that's why there's a lot of management, strict management in and around the dump sites. They have to be careful about who they allow, let's say, the scavengers inside of there because of this situation. If, for example, if you scratch a match and you can create an underground fire, so to speak, which then smolders, and you've seen the effects of that along that highway on the Beetham. So there's a lot of management protection. Now, if you have sorting stations, then you can sort your waste. Plastics, glass, paper, and then just the pure waste goes back. I mean, even your agricultural products can go back into compost and all the things. So it's a huge industry.
And that takes me to my next point, Roger. How often does Carib Glass collect from bins? How long actually does it take for people to buy into the idea of recycling?
Well, people get very excited about recycling because, you know, we speak to a lot of people and they get very excited around the concept of recycling. I think in Trinidad and Tobago today, people are getting far more aware, and thanks to programs like yours, people are getting far more aware of the whole question of recycling. So we get a lot of enthusiasm, but unless there's a mechanism in place to deal with it, then it really gets to just only to a certain point. Carib Glass, we have instituted our programs. So we put out bins, we put out barrels, we put out bags to encourage people to bring the glass into us.
Where are these bins situated?
Well, the bins will be situated at hotels. In fact, we have just instigated a new program with our sister isle, Tobago, where in fact we're sending a number of bins over to Tobago to be located at some of the main hotels, We're also teaming up with a number of people in Tobago who are also interested in recycling. Very little of that has been done in Tobago. We send bins to the local hotels here in Port of Spain and in Trinidad, and also into community groups. Blue Ridge, West Moorings, Victoria Gardens, these people and their communities will have bins that they will fill, and they will call us. We will send on the transport, pick up the bins, and bring them to Carib Glass.
Has this worked, or did you have to spend a lot of money up front to get this to work?
Well, it's working. I would say it's working in terms of the returns, as Mr. Mew is saying. It's still, a lot of people get excited, and then there's some tailing off. But what it means is a constant expansion of the program. And bear in mind that Carib Glass has been doing this all on their own. And to a certain degree, yes, it has worked, because we have a constant supply now of local recycled glass, call it as we say, but it's not enough. Of course, we're still scratching the surface. And more people hear about our program. They're contacting us and they're getting involved. It's an investment that we have made. For example, we have a bin and we have a barrel. We've distributed 190 barrels so far, and we've distributed 83 barrels. We distribute approximately 8,000 crocus bags on a yearly basis. All this is free of charge. And the idea behind it is that we can get you started, and we are hoping that you can see the value and you continue it from there. So we do get a fair share of that returns from there. So it's growing. Yeah.
Well, I sense a frustration from you both, as well as from in our Facebook pages, that people are saying, we want to recycle, we don't know how to do it, we don't know where to go. Where are we in terms of government and the laws and enforcement of laws of separating the garbage, of recycling?
Well, Mr. Mew.
Well, we're nowhere, quite frankly. The previous government, to be fair to them, had been considering quite a significant foray into this whole question of recycling of many, many things, because of course recycling is a huge industry. We're not just talking about bottles, plastic or glass. I mean, you're talking about tires, you're talking about electronic goods, you're talking about compost, you're talking about millions of things, white goods, all these things. They had, of course, teamed up at that particular point in time with some people out of Nova Scotia, where they were trying to bring to Trinidad the Nova Scotia model. Well, of course, the government subsequently changed, and we are now awaiting the new government to see what their next steps are going to be about how they're going to deal with recycling. We believe that this question of recycling, the government's got to set certain targets. They've got to put Trinidad and Tobago in a place where they say, by year X,
yes,
we are going to be recycling 20% of this, 30% of that, 40% of something else. It's going to be an integral part of the way we go about the business of running the country, both at the local government level and also at the full government level. And they've got to start thinking about putting in the legislation to do that. As I've mentioned, the container recycling bill has been around since the year 2000, and they have been unable to bring this to the people. We have to walk before we can run. We don't expect to be tomorrow, in 5 years, to be like Canada, where there's 5 different color-coded bins. I think read the article you had about the gentleman from Germany. They have got it all sorted out. We've got to start, but we've got to start somewhere.
Exactly, and we
This
want
is
to
the
talk
point.
more
We've got to
about
start somewhere, but we've not even got to first base yet.
Yes, well, and we want to talk more about that when we come back. We need to take a short break. We'll be right back with more on this environmental series on CNC3.